Dawn breaks over the Caribbean on 12 April 1782. The HMS Formidable, 98 guns, plows through moderate swells between the islands of Guadeloupe and Dominica. On her quarterdeck, a 63-year-old admiral struggles with gout and exhaustion, propped upright by sheer force of will. Admiral Sir George Bridges Rodney watches the French fleet ahead, 33 ships of the line under the Comte de Grasse, sailing northward to rendezvous with Spanish forces. Their destination, Jamaica. Their intention, to deliver the final blow that will break British power in the West Indies. The wind shifts suddenly. A gap appears in the French line. Rodney's captain of the fleet, Sir Charles Douglas, rushes to him. "Break the line, Sir George. The day is your own." Rodney hesitates. Every instinct, every regulation, every court-martial he has witnessed screams against it. The Royal Navy's fighting instructions demand that ships maintain their line of battle. Admiral Byng was executed 25 years earlier for less egregious violations. Yet ahead lies an opening that may never come again. "Do as you like," Rodney mutters, turning towards his cabin. Within minutes, Formidable crashes through the French formation, her guns thundering broadsides into the unprotected bows and sterns of enemy vessels. 5 more British ships follow. The French line shatters into chaos. By sunset, the Comte de Grasse's flagship surrenders. 4 French ships of the line are captured, and 1 destroyed. The planned invasion of Jamaica evaporates. French naval power in the Caribbean lies in ruins. Britain enters peace negotiations from a position of strength rather than desperation. Yet today, Admiral Rodney remains overshadowed by Nelson, forgotten by popular memory, despite achieving what historian Barbara Tuchman called the most significant sea combat prior to Trafalgar. His name adorns no column in Trafalgar Square. His tactics breaking the enemy's line are credited to others. His character, complex and often unappealing, contributed to his obscurity. Greedy, vain, and tactically conservative for most of his career, Rodney seemed an unlikely revolutionary. How did this flawed, debt-ridden aristocrat become the man who pioneered the tactic that would secure British naval supremacy for a generation? This is the story of genius, emerging from necessity, innovation from desperation, and victory from a commander who had everything to lose. George Bridges Rodney entered the world in February 1718 into that most precarious of circumstances, the impoverished gentry. Born in Walton-on-Thames, he was the son of Henry Rodney, a retired captain of Marines from an old landed family. 2 years after George's birth, his father lost everything in the South Sea bubble, the catastrophic financial crash that ruined thousands. The family's distant connection to James Bridges, the fabulously wealthy Duke of Chandos, saved young George from a life of genteel poverty, but it also planted within him a lifelong avarice for money, a hunger that would shape his triumphs and failures alike. At 14, in July 1732, Rodney volunteered for the Royal Navy, entering as a King's letter boy aboard HMS Sunderland, 60 guns. This was the standard path for young gentlemen with connections, but little. Fortune patronage opened doors, but ability kept them open. Through the influence of his uncle, Lord Aubrey Beauclerk, who commanded a frigate, Rodney advanced with remarkable speed. By February 1739, he achieved the rank of lieutenant. By 1742, aged just 24, he commanded the 60-gun HMS Plymouth, making him the youngest captain in His Majesty's Navy. The War of the Austrian Succession, which convulsed Europe from 1740 to 1748, provided Rodney his first opportunity to distinguish himself. In October 1747, commanding the 60-gun HMS Eagle, he fought under Admiral Edward Hawke at the Battle of Cape Finisterre. In the confused melee off the Spanish coast, Eagle engaged multiple French ships, her broadsides precise and devastating. Rodney's gallantry earned his first official recognition. Upon presentation to King George II by Lord Anson, His Majesty remarked that he had never been aware of having so young a captain in the Navy. Anson's reply became legend. "Sire, young Rodney has already been 6 years a captain, and without reflecting on others, I wish, most heartily wish, Your Majesty had 100 more such captains, to the terror of Your Majesty's enemies." Yet naval distinction brought no fortune. Rodney watched wealthier officers purchase estates and live comfortably whilst he scraped by on naval pay. The war provided a solution: prize money. Every enemy merchant vessel captured, every warship taken, generated funds divided amongst the victorious crew according to rank. Rodney pursued prizes with intensity bordering on obsession. By the war's end, he had accumulated the fortune he craved. He purchased an estate at Old Alresford and moved in London's high society. In 1751, he married Jane Compton, daughter of the Earl of Northampton, and embarked upon a political career, securing a parliamentary seat. He had arrived, but maintaining wealth proved more challenging than acquiring it. Rodney gambled. He lived extravagantly. He entertained lavishly. His careful fortune evaporated. Promotion to Rear Admiral in 1759 brought honor but insufficient income. When the 7 Years' War erupted, Rodney again turned to prize-taking to replenish his coffers. In 1759, he successfully attacked and destroyed French invasion craft assembled at Le Havre. In October 1761, appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Leeward Islands Station, he captured Martinique, St. Lucia, and Grenada within the first 3 months of 1762. These were remarkable victories, and remarkably profitable ones. Yet rumors circulated throughout the service that Rodney placed love of money above duty. When ordered to rush General Amherst across the Atlantic to Louisbourg, Rodney captured a valuable French East Indiaman and diverted to Vigo, spending 4 days haggling over prize money, whilst the general fumed. When ordered to Barbados to join Admiral Sir George Pocock for an attack on Cuba, Rodney instead sent ships off searching for prizes, missing the lucrative capture of Havana. After Martinique's fall, he quarreled bitterly with army officers over the division of spoils. His reputation as an officer more concerned with enrichment than excellence began to crystallize. The peace that followed the 7 Years' War brought Rodney neither satisfaction nor financial security. Created a baronet in January 1764, he received appointment as governor of Greenwich Hospital, a sinecure that provided income but left him idle and restless. He continued to gamble. His debts mounted. His wife Jane died in January 1757, leaving him with 3 children. He remarried in 1764 Henrietta Clise, daughter of a Lisbon merchant, who had cared for his children. More children followed, and with them, greater expenses. By the mid-1770s, Rodney faced financial catastrophe. His creditors pursued him relentlessly. The Earl of Sandwich, First Lord of the Admiralty, feared Rodney might provoke war with Spain merely to obtain prize money during his command in Jamaica from 1771 to 1774. From 1775 to 1778, Rodney lived in self-imposed exile in France, hiding from creditors, his naval career seemingly finished. A French nobleman, the Maréchal de Biron, whom Rodney had befriended, lent him funds to escape Paris when war with France loomed in 1778. It seemed an ignominious end for a once promising officer. Rodney was 60 years old, penniless, debt-ridden, and tainted by accusations of avarice. Yet his nation, locked in desperate struggle against France, Spain, and the American rebels, needed experienced commanders. In October 1779, despite his controversies, Rodney received appointment as Commander-in-Chief of the Leeward Islands Station. He was given one final chance. What he did with it would transform naval warfare. Rodney's voyage to his new command began with spectacular success. On 29 December 1779, his squadron of 22 ships of the line departed Plymouth, tasked with relieving Gibraltar under Spanish siege since July and convoying supplies to the West Indies. On 8 January 1780, 300 miles west of Cape Finisterre, the British sighted 22 Spanish vessels heading for Cadiz. Rodney's copper-sheathed warships, newly fitted with copper bottoms that prevented marine growth and increased speed, rapidly overhauled the convoy. By midday, all 22 Spanish ships surrendered, including the 64-gun Guipuzcoana, which Rodney renamed Prince William in honor of the young prince serving as midshipman in his fleet. A week later came an even more remarkable triumph. On 16 January 1780, off Cape St. Vincent, the southwestern point of Portugal, Rodney's fleet encountered 11 Spanish ships of the line under Admiral Don Juan de Langara, attempting to run for Cadiz. Despite hazy weather, heavy swells, and approaching darkness, Rodney ordered a general chase. His flag captain, Walter Young, advised engaging from leeward, positioning the British fleet between the Spanish and the shore to prevent escape. Rodney, ill with gout, commanded the battle from his cot. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the chase concluded. HMS Bedford, leading the copper-bottomed vanguard, engaged the Spanish rear. The 70-gun Santo Domingo exploded after receiving broadsides from 3 British ships, killing all but one of her crew. As winter darkness fell, Rodney made the unconventional decision to continue fighting. What followed became known as the Moonlight Battle. Naval engagements almost never continued after sunset. Through the night, under a full moon glimpsing through squally skies, British ships pursued and engaged the fleeing Spanish. The storm drove both fleets perilously close to the rocky Portuguese coast. By 2 o'clock in the morning, 6 Spanish ships of the line had struck their colors, including Langara's flagship Phoenix. Only 4 escaped. Langara himself lay severely wounded. The victory electrified Britain. Rodney had relieved Gibraltar, defeated a Spanish squadron, and demonstrated the tactical aggressiveness the Navy desperately needed. He arrived in the Caribbean in March 1780 with 17 ships of the line, joining forces with the squadron of Rear Admiral Sir Samuel Hood to bring British strength to 33 ships. For the next year, Rodney maneuvered against the French Admiral the Comte de Guichen in a series of indecisive engagements. On April 1780, off Martinique, Rodney fought Guichen to a tactical draw, a battle rendered indecisive, Rodney believed, by his captain's failure to properly execute his signals. In February 1781 came the incident that nearly destroyed Rodney's career and reputation forever. Following the outbreak of the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War in December 1780, orders from London directed Rodney to seize the Dutch Caribbean island of St. Eustatius. This tiny volcanic speck, barely 20 miles in circumference, operated as the West Indies' primary entrepot. During the Crassus, American War, it had assumed crucial importance, channeling gunpowder, weapons, and supplies to the Continental Army despite British blockade. Rodney harbored particular hatred for this nest of vipers. He assembled an overwhelming force, more than a dozen ships of the line and 3,000 troops under Major General Sir John Vaughan, for an island defended by 60 Dutch militia. On 3 February 1781, the expedition arrived off St. Eustatius. Governor Johannes de Graaf, unaware that war had been declared, surrendered immediately to avoid bloodshed. What followed shocked even Rodney's supporters. The British discovered wealth exceeding their wildest expectations: 130 merchantmen in the harbor, warehouses crammed with tobacco and sugar, stores filled with provisions and naval equipment. The total value approached £3 million. Under British custom, the Crown took the lion's share, but commanders received significant portions of prize money. Rodney and Vaughan, rather than delegating the task of cataloging and distributing the captured wealth, oversaw it personally. They remained on Street Eustatius for months, meticulously sorting through goods, conducting auctions, and maximizing profit. Rodney confiscated not merely Dutch and enemy property but British merchants' goods, as well merchandise he deemed treasonous for potentially reaching the Americans. He arrested 101 Jewish merchants, stripped them of valuables sewn into their clothing, and deported them to street kits without families. He even ordered graves dug up, searching for hidden treasure. The controversy erupted immediately. Admiral Hood, Rodney's second-in-command, was appalled. He privately called Rodney a mere thief and accused him of lining his pocket rather than advancing the war. Hood argued correctly that Rodney should have immediately pursued the French fleet under the Comte de Grasse, then sailing to Martinique. Instead, Rodney remained at Street Eustatius, absorbed in prize administration, whilst de Grasse assembled forces unmolested. Rodney even weakened his fleet by sending 2 ships of the line to escort treasure vessels to England, though both desperately needed repair. The strategic consequences proved catastrophic. On 5 September 1781, whilst Rodney remained in the Caribbean distracted by his prizes, a French fleet under de Grasse trapped a British squadron under Admiral Thomas Graves at the Battle of the Chesapeake. Unable to relieve the British Army under Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia, Graves withdrew. On 19 October, Cornwallis surrendered. American independence became inevitable. Many, including Hood, believed that had Rodney pursued de Grasse in spring 1781 rather than lingering at Street Eustatius, the disaster at Yorktown might have been prevented. In August 1781, Rodney returned to England pleading ill health. In reality, he faced parliamentary inquiry. Members of Parliament demanded explanation for his conduct at Street Eustatius. British merchants sued him for confiscating their property. He would spend the rest of his life entangled in litigation. His naval career appeared finished. At 63, racked by gout, tainted by scandal, he seemed destined for ignominious retirement. But Britain faced potential catastrophe. With Yorktown lost, the 13 colonies effectively independent, the French and Spanish planned their masterstroke, capturing Jamaica, the jewel of Britain's Caribbean empire. De Grasse assembled at Fort Royal, Martinique, preparing to rendezvous with Spanish forces and 15,000 troops at Saint-Domingue. Despite everything, the government sent Rodney back to the Caribbean in February 1782. He was still their best admiral, and he would have one final opportunity to redeem himself. On 7 April 1782, Rodney received intelligence that de Grasse had departed Martinique with 33 ships of the line and a massive convoy of over 100 merchant vessels. The French were heading northwest to join the Spanish. By 8 April, Rodney's 36 ships of the line had departed Gros Islet Bay, Street Lucia, in pursuit. His flagship, Formidable, 98 guns, flew the white ensign with Rodney's flag as Admiral of the White at the main. His second-in-command, Admiral Sir Samuel Hood, who despised him, commanded 12 ships as Admiral of the Red in HMS Barfleur, 90 guns. Vice Admiral Francis Samuel Drake, a collateral descendant of the great Elizabethan, commanded the van with 12 ships as Admiral of the Blue. By late afternoon on 9 April, British frigates sighted the French armada, crawling past Dominica. The slow-moving convoy could not outrun Rodney's copper-bottomed warships. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Hood's van, positioned to leeward of the French rear, opened fire at 100 yards range. The French, attempting to protect their convoy whilst maneuvering towards Guadeloupe, returned fire. For several hours, the two fleets engaged in a running cannonade. British gunnery, enhanced by recently introduced flintlock firing mechanisms and short-barreled carronades on the upper decks, proved devastating at close range. The French suffered heavier casualties, their larger crews packed tightly into wooden hulls, with 15,000 troops crammed aboard for the Jamaica invasion. Captain William Bain of HMS Alfred fell killed by chain shot. On the French Caton, a gun exploded with 80 casualties. By nightfall, both fleets drifted apart, damaged but intact. During the night of 10 April, disaster struck the French. Two ships, Zélé and Jason, collided near the coast of Guadeloupe. Zélé, with damaged rigging and slow sailing, became a liability. De Grasse faced a cruel choice: abandon the crippled ship and continue to his rendezvous, or turn and fight to protect her. Pride and honor demanded he fight. At dawn on 12 April, Rodney's lookouts reported that the French were bearing down, formed in line of battle, ready to engage decisively. It was a lovely West Indian morning. Bright sun, gentle wind from the east, moderate swell. Both fleets sailed with the wind abeam, the French to windward. 36 British ships faced 30 French. De Grasse had detached 3 vessels to escort the damaged ships to Guadeloupe. The two lines approached each other in the rigid formation prescribed by the fighting. Instructions: ships in line ahead, each following the one before, broadside batteries prepared. At 7 o'clock, the wind came properly. Drake's van led the British line down past the French at 100 yards, close enough for Marines to aim muskets. The parallel lines exchanged murderous broadsides. British carronades, useless at long range on 9 April, now unleashed their devastating power. Formidable alone, Rodney later reported, fired 80 broadsides on 12 April, 35 tons of iron hurled at the enemy. One French officer estimated over 100,000 shots fired that day, counting swivel guns. The carnage was appalling. Wooden splinters driven by cannon shot caused horrific wounds. Falling masts crushed men. Grape shot swept decks clear of gun crews. Then, shortly before 9 o'clock, the wind shifted. A gap opened in the French line, somewhere between De Grasse's flagship and the ships ahead. What happened next remains disputed by historians. According to Vice Admiral Charles Dashwood, then a 17-year-old aide-de-camp, Sir Charles Douglas met Rodney coming from his cabin. "Sir George, I give you the joy of victory." Rodney dismissed the crazed sentiment. "The day was not half won. Break the line, Sir George," Douglas urged. "The day is your own, and I shall ensure you the victory." "No," Rodney replied. "I will not break my line," Douglas persisted. Rodney countermanded his orders. "Remember, Sir Charles, that I am Commander-in-Chief," Rodney snapped. But after another plea, Rodney relented. Well, do as you like," he said, turning back towards his cabin. Douglas ordered the helm put to port. Formidable swung towards the gap in the French line. Within minutes, she crashed through, positioning herself to leeward of the enemy. Her port and starboard batteries fired broadsides into the unprotected bows and sterns of French ships, raking fire that swept the entire length of enemy decks, causing maximum destruction. 5 more British ships followed Formidable through the gap. HMS Duke, 74 guns, turned independently and broke the line at another point. The French formation, sliced into 3 separate sections, dissolved into chaos. French ships, designed for graceful sailing, found themselves trapped between British vessels firing from both sides. The rigid line of battle, the foundation of 18th-century naval tactics, had been shattered. Individual French ships, isolated and outnumbered, struck their colors. The 74-gun Glorieux, after absorbing devastating fire from multiple British ships, surrendered. The 70-gun Hector, beset by 5 British ships with water pouring through shot holes faster than pumps could manage, hauled down her flag. Her captain, Claude Eugène Chauchouart de la Vicomte, lay mortally wounded. As afternoon wore into evening, De Grasse's magnificent 104-gun flagship Ville de Paris, the largest warship in the world, found herself surrounded. Hood's Barfleur, Canada, and Centaur pounded her from 3 sides. Her masts fell. Her guns fell silent. Her decks ran with blood. At sunset, de Grasse surrendered his sword. Captain Lord James Cranstoun boarded to take possession and beheld, as he later told a fellow officer, a scene altogether terrible. Between foremast and mainmast, at every step he was over his buckles in blood, the carnage having been prodigious. By nightfall, the victory was complete. 4 French ships of the line captured, including the greatest warship, afloat. 1 ship destroyed. The French lost approximately 5,000 killed, wounded, or captured. British casualties numbered around 1,000. The Comte de Grasse, France's naval hero, was a prisoner. The planned invasion of Jamaica had evaporated. Rodney, exhausted, had an armchair brought to Formidable's deck. There, in historian Barbara Tuckman's words, he sat in the moonlight contemplating his colossal prize and expressing from time to time murmurs of self-appreciation of his success. The Battle of the Saintes transformed the strategic situation in the Western Hemisphere. The remnants of de Grasse's fleet limped back to Cap François, where disease ravaged the troops intended for Jamaica's conquest. The invasion was abandoned. When news of Rodney's victory reached London in mid-May, carried by Captain Lord Cranstoun aboard the frigate Andromache, Britain erupted in celebration. After Yorktown's humiliation, after the loss of the American colonies, Rodney had demonstrated that Britannia still ruled the waves. Parliament voted Rodney a pension of £2,000 per year. By patent of 19 June 1782, he was created Baron Rodney of Rodney Stoke, Somerset. He presented the Comte de Grasse personally to King George III. Painters vied to commemorate his victory. Thomas Gainsborough and Joshua Reynolds both created celebrated portraits. Taverns across Britain renamed themselves the Admiral Rodney. In Jamaica, the Colonial Assembly commissioned John Bacon to sculpt a magnificent statue in Italian marble, dressed in Roman robes, fronted by cannons from the captured Ville de Paris. The monument still stands in Spanish Town. Yet, even in triumph, controversy pursued Rodney. Critics argued he should have organized vigorous pursuit of the fleeing French remnant. More ships might have been captured. The victory could have been more complete. Orders for his recall, sent before the battle, stood. Rodney returned to England in August, striking his flag and retiring from active service. He lived quietly at his country estate until his death in London on 24 May 1792, aged 74, still entangled in lawsuits over Street Eustatius. The question that fascinated contemporaries and continues to intrigue historians is this: who truly conceived the tactic of breaking the line? Was it Rodney's premeditated plan, honed over decades of study? Was it Sir Charles Douglas's urgent suggestion, born of gunnery expertise and innovative thinking? Was it the spontaneous grasping of opportunity by a seasoned commander? Or was it simply a freakish wind that opened a gap, with British ships following their flagship through by instinct? Douglas's son, General Sir Howard Douglas, spent years after his father's death collecting testimonies arguing that Sir Charles deserved credit. Vice Admiral Dashwood's account, cited earlier, supports this interpretation. Douglas had proven himself an innovator. He pioneered flintlock firing mechanisms, introduced false keels on warships, and wrote extensively on naval gunnery. He was willing to attempt the unconventional. Rodney, by contrast, believed in following regulations. He had court-martialed officers for failing to maintain proper formation. Admiral Byng's execution haunted every British commander. Yet Rodney himself never publicly acknowledged Douglas's role. In dispatches and letters, he claimed credit for the maneuver. Some historians note that Rodney had encountered John Clerk of Eldon's essay on naval tactics, which discussed breaking the line, and had attempted the tactic unsuccessfully at the Battle of Martinique in 1780. Perhaps the Saintes represented the successful execution of a long-considered idea. Perhaps Rodney's "do as you like" to Douglas was not reluctant permission but weary acknowledgement of what he had always intended. The truth likely lies in the complexity historians often find uncomfortable. Naval tactics evolve through accumulated experience. Breaking the line had been discussed theoretically for years. Several commanders had attempted variations. What made the Saintes decisive was the combination of circumstances: a wind shift that created opportunity, a captain willing to seize it, an admiral willing to permit deviation from doctrine, copper-bottomed ships with the speed to exploit it, carronades with the firepower to punish it, and French ships slowed by convoy escort duties. Innovation rarely springs fully formed from a single mind. It emerges from conversation, experiment, and the convergence of technology with opportunity. What matters more than attribution is consequence. The tactic employed at the Saintes, whether Rodney's, Douglas's, or some collaborative improvisation, became the signature maneuver of the Royal Navy's dominance. 23 years later, on 21 October 1805, Admiral Horatio Nelson employed the same principle at Trafalgar, deliberately breaking the Franco-Spanish line in 2 places. Nelson's victory was more complete, more celebrated, and more strategically decisive. It ended Napoleon's threat of invasion and secured British naval supremacy for a century. But Rodney had demonstrated the method. Nelson perfected it. Modern naval. Historians recognize Rodney's significance. His victory at the Saintes restored British confidence after Yorktown's disaster. It enabled Britain to negotiate peace from strength rather than weakness. In the Treaty of Paris of 3 September 1783, which ended the American Revolutionary War, Britain regained most of its Caribbean islands. Jamaica remained British for another century. The empire, though diminished by American independence, survived. More importantly, Rodney's tactics demonstrated that the rigid fighting instructions, the Royal Navy's tactical gospel, since the mid-17th century were not immutable law but guidelines to be adapted. Initiative, aggression, and tactical flexibility became increasingly valued. The generation of naval officers who followed Rodney, including Nelson, grew up in a service that had learned the value of breaking conventions when opportunity demanded. Yet Rodney himself remained a problematic figure. His avarice was undeniable. His conduct at Street Eustatius was shameful. His treatment of Jewish merchants was reprehensible even by 18th-century standards. His obsession with prize money repeatedly compromised military effectiveness. Admiral Hood's assessment, "a mere thief," contained bitter truth. Rodney made enemies easily. He quarreled with subordinates. He manipulated patronage shamelessly, making his 15-year-old son a post captain. As naval historian Nicholas Roger notes, Rodney possessed weaknesses with respect to patronage, which destroyed the basis of trust, upon which alone an officer can command. These flaws help explain why Rodney, unlike Nelson, never captured the public's enduring affection. Nelson was martyred at his moment of triumph, dying aboard HMS Victory at Trafalgar. His death transformed him into legend. Rodney lived another decade after the Saintes, growing old, fighting lawsuits, and reminding Britain of his less admirable characteristics. He lacked Nelson's common touch, his ability to inspire devotion amongst ordinary seamen. Where Nelson was beloved, Rodney was merely respected, and sometimes not even that. Geography also contributed to his obscurity. The Caribbean theater, whilst economically crucial, seemed distant and peripheral compared to the Mediterranean and Channel, where Nelson fought. The Saint, though strategically vital, lacked Trafalgar's apocalyptic stakes. Rodney saved Jamaica. Nelson saved Britain from invasion. The difference in historical resonance is understandable. Yet for those who study the evolution of naval warfare, Rodney occupies a pivotal position. He bridged the gap between the rigid formalism of early 18th century combat, and the aggressive flexibility of the Nelsonian age. His career demonstrates that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, not from young firebrands eager to overturn tradition, but from aging conservatives desperate enough to gamble convention against catastrophe. On 24 May 1792, Admiral George Rodney, 1st Baron Rodney, died at his London residence, aged 74. He was succeeded as 2nd Baron by his son George. He was buried with military honors, and a memorial designed by Charles Rossi was erected in St. Paul's Cathedral crypt. Yet no grand public monument commemorates him as Nelson's column dominates Trafalgar Square. Admiral Rodney's pillar stands on Bryden Hill in Wales, but few visit. His statue in Jamaica honors him and the empire he helped preserve, but Britain itself largely forgot. In the 2 centuries since his death, historians have slowly rehabilitated Rodney's reputation. Modern scholarship recognizes his tactical contribution whilst acknowledging his character flaws. The debate over who truly conceived breaking the line continues, but most historians now credit some combination of Rodney's willingness and Douglas's insistence. What's certain is that on 12 April 1782, whether by design or opportunity, whether through genius or desperation, the tactic was employed decisively for the first time in major fleet action. The broader lessons of Rodney's career resonate beyond naval history. He reminds us that greatness and venality can coexist within the same individual, that financial desperation can drive innovation as powerfully as intellectual curiosity, that institutional conservatism, the very quality that made Rodney hesitate to break the line, serves important purposes, maintaining discipline and predictability, even as exceptional circumstances demand its violation. That flawed men can achieve remarkable things when circumstances align. Rodney also illuminates the messy reality of historical change. We prefer narratives of lone genius, the visionary who sees clearly what others miss, who single-handedly revolutionizes warfare. The truth is muddier, Douglas suggested. Rodney permitted. The wind shifted. Technology, copper sheathing, carronades, flintlock mechanisms enabled. Circumstance, the collision of Zélé and Jason, the convoy. Slowing de Grasse's fleet created opportunity. Innovation emerged from this confluence, not from any single brilliant mind. 4 Royal Navy warships have borne the name HMS Rodney in his honor. Small wooden boats in Newfoundland are still called Rodneys after his governorship there, where he earned a reputation for fairness that contrasted sharply with his later conduct at St. Eustatius. This geographical scatter of commemoration reflects Rodney himself. Remembered where he governed justly, honored where he fought brilliantly, forgotten where his flaws outweighed his achievements. Britain's military tradition is built upon such complex figures, men who were neither purely heroic nor wholly villainous, but products of their time who rose to historical moments despite personal failings. Rodney fought for an empire built on slavery and conquest. He treated defeated enemies with shocking cruelty. He placed personal enrichment above duty repeatedly. Yet he also pioneered tactical innovation that secured British naval supremacy for a generation. He relieved Gibraltar. He defeated Spanish and French fleets when Britain desperately needed victories. He prevented Jamaica's capture when the empire seemed collapsing. We need not excuse Rodney's avarice or cruelty to recognize his significance. We need not ignore his tactical contributions to acknowledge his character flaws. History's most important figures are rarely its most admirable. The task of understanding the past requires embracing complexity, resisting the urge to simplify, and recognizing that the same man who sat counting prize money in St. Eustatius could, a year later, revolutionize naval warfare in the waters off Dominica. As dusk falls over the Caribbean today, the Îles de Saintes remain much as they were in 1782, small volcanic islands between Guadeloupe and Dominica, peaceful and little known. Few visitors realize that these waters witnessed one of the 18th century's most significant naval battles. The cannons are silent. The blood has long since washed away. The fleets have vanished into history. But the tactical revolution born here endured. From the Saintes to Trafalgar, from Rodney to Nelson, the Royal Navy learned that rigid orthodoxy could be broken when genius met opportunity, that calculated risk could yield decisive victory, that the line of battle, sacred for a century, was merely a tool to be employed or discarded as circumstances demanded. Admiral George Rodney, greedy, vain, tactically conservative, and perpetually in debt, remains one of the forgotten architects of British naval supremacy. He deserves neither hagiography nor dismissal, but something more difficult: honest assessment. He was a deeply flawed man who, in one crucial moment, made the decision that changed everything. History remembers Nelson's genius. It should also remember Rodney's gamble. For sometimes, the most profound innovations come not from those who love change, but from those who, faced with catastrophe, finally choose it over convention.